Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm finding out how many pawns I need to beat Martin. This video idea was actually suggested by one of you. Thanks, Tiberius. If you guys have other ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments below. The way this will work is I will start with one pawn, and I will add a row for every game. Let's get started. Well, that worked out just about as expected. There's no way for me to win anymore because I just have a king. Let's go ahead and add a row for game 2. All right, we're back with game 2 with a whole new row of pawns. And I think my strategy is just one, not to let him get behind my pawns, because once he gets somewhere back here, there's no way that I'll be able to hold on to them with just my king. And two, kind of play slow and just let him make a lot of mistakes before trying to capitalize on any of them. So I'll actually start with a king move this time. And he plays knight to a6. I can already feel a blunder coming, so I just need to play slow. I'd like to keep my king somewhere in the center so he's in reach of as many pawns as possible. We'll play king to c2, and he pushes c5. So we'll keep going with just king back to d2. He pushes h5. If he does continue with h4, then I can push g4, and we already have the beginning of a sort of impenetrable wall. So I'll just keep going back and forth, king back to c2. We do get h4, and obviously we don't want to trade in this position because he'd bring his rook out. This pawn is weak, he gets behind my pawns, and everything goes downhill from there. So we'll push g4 instead to kind of lock up the position. He plays rook to h7, and I'll just move back king to d2. And there we go, our first aggressive move, queen to a5. This pawn is already covered by our king that was in the center. This pawn is getting hit, so I really don't have a choice but to push pawn to a4. And we get our first Martin sacrifice. Brilliant sacrifice by Martin. Martin plays very aggressive chess. Queen takes c3. I have to think here very carefully, and my ultimate decision is just capture back. And here it comes. And this is my point. This is why I wanted to play slow, because I just needed the probability of Martin to make a blunder to go up. So we'll go ahead and capitalize on that, take the free rook. And we're met with knight to b4. I'm thinking maybe d4, remove the guard. If he takes, we take the knight. This discovered check isn't actually scary because I just moved my king back. This pawn doesn't do anything, so I think we'll go with that. We'll play d4. He ignores it. He plays knight to f6. I think here what makes most sense is just capturing this pawn, removing the guard, seeing if we can pick up another free piece. Right, Martin does not allow that. He plays check, forks my king and my hanging pawn, which luckily I can address both of those with a simple king move off to d3. And Martin gets a little bit carried away with the forks. He's been doing fork tactics recently, but he hasn't been doing free pieces tactics recently, so we'll just take that knight. And we're met with g5. Now, as we all know, en passant is forced, so I really don't have anything to think about, but I'll entertain the idea of pawn takes g5 as well, because this could actually be super strong. If he doesn't take my h5 pawn, I can actually just push my pawn and it'll be supported, and then push and try for a queen. If I do take and he takes back, I'm not super happy with my pawn structure, but I can just play something like maybe e4, king e3, f4, and try to make some progress with the pawns on the king side. So we'll capture this pawn, ignoring forced en passant, and he does in fact capture on h5. So Martin knows about passed pawns. I should be worried here, I think, about knight to f4, because it gives check, it picks up the pawn on h3, and it's going to be kind of hard for me to stop this pawn without ceasing all other activity to go address it. So I think I should actually play king to e4. It covers f4, and it supports pawn to f4, pawn to f5, and I still have some hopes and dreams of eventually getting a passed pawn. So we'll play king to e4. The king is my most active piece right now, and he plays rook to b8, which is kind of slow, but it makes some sense. He can probably force a pawn trade of some kind, for example, just by playing b6. I either give up the pawn or I push it, and I give it up anyways. So b6 kind of forces me to take if I don't want to lose the pawn for free, and then he'll recapture with the rook, activate his rook, and that's going to be very hard for me to hold on to. The way that I could address this is playing b4, That way, if b6 comes, I capture, he recaptures, I push b5, and the rook can't really do much about these two pawns. So I'll play that. I'll play b4. Oh, interesting. We're met with d6 instead. Not something I expected, but not something I'm particularly worried about either. If he takes, I take, and there's no longer a b pawn for him to target. So something like b6, I just take, or I could even push c6. That might be more challenging. So I'll ignore this altogether, and I'll just push f4. I'll continue with my plan. And Martin plays bishop f5, sacrificing another piece. He doesn't need all of these pieces. They're in his way. So I'll do him a favor and get rid of this bishop that was in his way. He was setting up a fork. Very nice. Knight to g3. He will probably pick up this pawn on e2 next. But I think this is really good for me because I can play king g4. And if I can pick up the h4 pawn and then shuffle my king back out of the way, I can actually have 3 pawns all marching into his position at the same time. Most likely the h pawn is the one that I will try to allow to make a run for it. So we'll play king to g4. He ignores the free pawn altogether and reroutes his knight to e4. I guess now he targets the c5 pawn. I don't really want to give him a free pawn, so I'll take on d6 with tempo. And he doesn't take back. I was going to say after he takes back, then I pick up the pawn. But I guess I'll just keep going. I'll capture this one next. Again with tempo, he finally takes back in light of his bishop being under attack. But he takes back with the king, which is a very unique decision. I'll continue by taking this pawn on h4. And he moves his king back. So this is looking really good. He's looking at the pawn on b4, but to be fair, he's also looking at the pawn on a4. I'm pretty much giving up those pawns at this point. I don't see any value in trying to defend them. So instead, I'll play king to g4, and I will start marching these pawns forward. So we'll go king to g4. He finally does pick up a free pawn, and we push. He plays knight to e4. I don't see any threat other than getting behind my pawns, but I want my king to march forward anyways, so I'll push again. He plays king to c7, which makes a lot of sense. Well, if this is actually his plan, if it's not just a random move. It does make a lot of sense if his plan is to play rook to g8 and try to get some coverage on these pawns with his rook. I'm not sure which one's better. Do I push king f5 and then try for e4? Because this is definitely slower. Pushing all 4 pawns together is definitely slower. Or do I push f5, g6 now, and just try to force the issue as quickly as possible? I'm kind of tempted to just put him in a critical situation, so we'll start with f5. He plays rook to a8, defending the very weakened a7 pawn. I think another thing that's important to consider here is that he has a dark squared bishop, so just by putting all of my pawns on light squares, for example with a g6 push, inherently there's no way for him to capture any of those pawns with his dark squared bishop. He'd have to capture them with his knight and his rook, and it seems really difficult after g6 to see how the knight and the rook are going to coordinate to actually fulfill that. So we'll go with the more solid option, g6. He plays knight to f6 check, which is really amusing. You'd think he would have set that up first with something like rook to h8, so that he actually has something to capture after, but he doesn't. He just plays check right away, and I think that just invites king to g5, targets the knight, brings the king closer to supporting the pawns. I don't think there's much more thought that needs to go into that. He pushes knight to g8. A very sketchy move, because what it does is it cuts off the rook from supporting the h8 square. So now I'm really interested in something like h6, h7, h8, maybe supported with g7. If the bishop tries to block, I play f6 or something of that nature. So we'll push h6. He gives check. Oh, I didn't see that check, actually. Wow, that's a really good skewer. He gives check, and now he's hitting the pawn with 2 different pieces. My best bet is to just play king to h5. Oh, that's really frustrating, because now I lose the pawn that I was really hoping would make it to the other side. But we'll march forward, king to h5. And in Martin we trust. Martin would not get rid of our only winning chance. Martin will play rook to f8 after realizing the f-pawn is in danger. Oh no. Realistically, what he should have done is capture this pawn with his knight. That way, if a capture here occurs, he recaptures with his knight, and these pawns are all too far disconnected to actually cause any sort of issues. I think the appropriate follow-up here is g7, tempo on the rook, and then after h7, it's impossible for him to stop me from queening. So we'll play g7. Oh, Martin finds the critical move, knight f6 check. There's only one legal move on the board, and I'll play it, king back to h4, and he finesses my pawn structure with rook to g8. Very nicely done. I will now play e4, just like I mentioned. Hopefully he'll take the poison pawn. If after e4 he takes this pawn, this is going to be very, very hard to hold on to any fighting chances. But we'll play e4. And Martin just completely goes off the rails and decides that the queen side is looking ripe for an attack, and launches a5. I think my plan now is to try to just bum rush him with my pawns. I think I'm in a good position to do that now. I have no legal forward moves with my king anymore, and it would make no sense to try to walk my king all the way around. He's gotten his steps in already. He marched all the way through the board. His Fitbit is happy. He's doing fine. So I'm going to try to bum rush him with pawns instead with like e5, try to remove the knight from defending h7. And if he actually moves his knight into h7, it's a little hard for me to see how to make progress, but maybe I can push like king h5, e6, capture, king g6. There's still fighting chances. So we'll push e5. And that was not on the books. That was not on my bingo card. Rook to b8 was not on my bingo card. I think I just take the knight. I take the free knight. There's nobody defending h7. So realistically takes, and then the critical move would be bishop takes h6, because he even has options of rook to g8, sack the bishop, and then he's just up a clean rook. The other option is push e6, but if captures, I've left a knight on the table defending both of these pawns, and this pawn isn't going anywhere by himself. So we'll make the only move that really makes sense, and that's capture the knight. And I think I can say that we're winning now. I think I can confidently say that Martin is not going to win this. With king to c6, he misses the critical move, which is bishop takes h6. This pawn is not going anywhere without support, but now I can push h7, and you can't stop both of these. What you can do is give a little intermediate check, and I will shuffle onto a light square so you don't check me anymore. And yeah, king to c5, it's just not going to be enough. We'll queen with the g-pawn. He captures, and we queen again. Now it's just a matter of cleaning this up. I'll go ahead and take. I kind of want to get another queen just to just to promote my pawns. They worked really hard. They deserve a little promotion. So we'll give them a little promotion. And we will take the free bishop on the way as well. Thank you. And we've promoted all of our surviving pawns. It's the least I could do. I put them in a terrible situation. So I'll give them their promotion. Well deserved. We'll go ahead and wrap up this checkmate. And that's it. All right. Thank you again, Tiberius, for the idea. This was actually really fun. I hate playing Martin because he's so random, but it's always a good time. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.